Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. The Rolling Stones classic song goes, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need." In this story, you'll see how true that is. We go back to 1967 when I was 23 years old, and I had just flunked out of law school. And I had tried to get into countless law schools all around the country of every shape and sort. And I didn't realize, but I couldn't get into law school again, having flunked out, until I went to a place called Portia Law School up in Boston. And the dean there actually told me a straight story. I was getting these runaround rejection letters, which never really alluded to the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter was, all law schools are accredited by the American Bar Association, and they all subscribe to a rule about transferring from one school to another. And the ABA rule is this: if you're transferring from one accredited school to another one, you must be in good academic standing of the school you're leaving. So having been bounced out or expelled academically, I wasn't in good standing, and I couldn't get into any of these other places and I didn't realize that until the dean of Portia Law School was a swell guy, and he told me, in effect, you're blackballed. And now I knew the truth, and the only alternative for me was a course in New York of law office study, a clerkship, under the auspices of a lawyer who was licensed and admitted to practice in New York, who would be my mentor and tutor. And having done that, would sign off on a certificate that I did it for 4 years. And I would then be eligible to take the bar exam. And all of that was encapsulated in Rule 5 of the Rules of the Court of Appeals of the State of New York for the admission of attorneys. And it's all there in statutory form. Well, there's a slight problem. At that time, 1967, there was a Vietnam War going on, and there was a draft. I myself was draft deferred because I was working as a New York City teacher in a highly hazardous school in the South Bronx, in the 41st Precinct, which led the city in crime. And they called it Fort Apache. And in those days, they said the Bronx was burning, and it was burning. They were burning down all the empty houses, and some of them that weren't so empty. And I wasn't unpatriotic, but I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I was a political science student, and one of the people we studied was George Kennan. And George Kennan was the author of our national policy in the Cold War, the policy of containment of communism. And he himself said that the United States need not be concerned with communism establishing itself in small, out-of-the-way countries like Vietnam. He said to be worried about that and be concerned about that is analogous to an elephant being scared of a mouse. He says there's no need for it. It's not going to be affecting us in any manner, way, shape, or form, or our policy. And I knew that. And I was not, again, against the country, but the war was just unreasonable as far as I was concerned. And I thought I would go out and finish the job of becoming a lawyer, because that was number one on my agenda. My self-respect was on the line. They threw me out of law school, and I knew I didn't deserve to get thrown out of law school. I thought it was totally unjust, but who's going to listen? You know, when you've been thrown out, that's a hard sell, even to people like in my family. They all figure, well, you must have deserved to get thrown out. You did something wrong. And I didn't, but that's the story for another day. In the meantime, all I wanted to do was start up the clerkship. So I still needed some other method of, if I was going to not teach, of another job. I took the exam for the New York Police Department, and I scored very high, but I flunked the physical because it was a 5'7", 5 feet 7 inch minimum height requirement, and I measured out at 5'6 3/4. So it wasn't meant to be. But the police department, there goes my police career. The next thing I tried was the United States Marine Corps. There was a communications battalion stationed in Fort Schuyler in the Bronx, right across the river from Long Island Sound from Queens. And it was a reserve battalion. And they were looking for officers, and they were signing up officers on a conditional induction. You had, if you passed the requirements, they had 6 months within which to call you. And if they didn't call you within the 6 months, then you had no induction or obligation to the Marine Corps. You were still exposed to the draft, but after that. But I took the test, and the recruiting officer was this Southerner with a very slow drawl. He was from the deep South, and I'm a New York City Italian guy. He wouldn't take much liking to me until he got the results of the test back, because he gets credit for the recruits, and I got the highest marks they ever had there. So now I'm definitely, he's looking at me like golden boy now. He wants me in, and there was one more hurdle, and that was the physical. To be a candidate for OTS, or Officer Training School in the Marine Corps, which they run down in Quantico, Virginia, you have to be in perfect physical condition. The reason being, they want the officers to be in at least as good condition, if not better, than the men they're leading. And the Marine Corps always has a narrow budget among the armed forces, and they don't want to be paying officers disability pensions. So they screen everybody very carefully before you go. So along the procedural rules, I had to go to St. Albans Naval Hospital. It was on a Saturday from morning till the evening for a full GI physical where they checked everything. I was pretty confident. I was in good shape, and I didn't think there was going to be any problem. I was 23 years old. I had been a football coach, and I wasn't about to go to the Marine Corps to be abused by some drill instructor with wild eyes. And I knew, I was going to take some abuse, because they haze everybody when you get there. But as a football coach, I knew also that they would concentrate on the guys who were lagging behind physically. And the final test at Officer Training School, the final physical test was a 3-mile run in which you had to register 3 sub 7-minute miles. And I had done my road work. I had already been doing that. I was able to do that before I ever went, with the idea that, they were going to be concentrating on the guys who were lagging behind, and I would get an easier ride after the initial hazing stuff. So I felt I was in pretty good shape. Well, I went to the physical, and I went through all day, and so far so good. Everything was good until the last exam. And that was at 5 o'clock on Saturday night. It was a dental exam. And the examiner was a naval officer. He was a commander, the rank of commander, a lovely guy. And he examined my teeth, and he said, "Son, you got a problem." I said, "Well, what's that, sir?" He said, "When are you supposed to sign up?" I said, "I'm supposed to sign up on Wednesday, 4 or 5 days from now." He said, "Well, I don't think you're going to make it." I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, for one thing, you have 9 cavities." He said, "Now, most of them are small. A couple of them are a little more serious, but that's not the real problem." He said, "The real problem is you have 3 wisdom teeth. Did you have one taken out?" I said, "Yes, I did. It was impacted. It was real nasty." He said, "Well, the Marine Corps doesn't want anybody to go in with wisdom teeth." And which was news to me. I said, "Oh, boy." He said, "Yeah, they're nothing but problems, and they don't want any of that stuff." He said, "So the requirement is you can't have any wisdom teeth. So for you to make the induction on Wednesday," he says, "basically you're looking at getting 9 cavities filled and 3 wisdom teeth extracted. I don't know how you're going to do that." Well, I left. I thanked him, and I thought it over, and I was pretty gung-ho to get in the Marines, maybe prematurely gung-ho. I was already thinking like a Marine, and I called a friend of mine who I went to college with, who is now a dentist. And on Monday morning and Tuesday, he did 9 cavities, took care of them, filled them up, and extracted 3 wisdom teeth. And I was walking around like I did 30 rounds with Sugar Ray Robinson or something like that. It was really, I was a little shaky-bakey. But on Wednesday morning, I showed up at Fort Schuyler, and there's my friend, the old old boy recruiting sergeant. And I raise my right hand. I take an oath. He salutes me. He shakes my hand and he says, "Welcome aboard. We got 6 months to call you." He says, "But it's not going to be 6 months. With your high marks, you're going to go in a matter of days. Be ready. Be ready to leave." I said, "Okay, thank you, Sergeant. Appreciate it." And I went home. Of course, my mother was very unhappy. And I went back to work the next day. And the teachers, in a couple of days, threw me a little party. They brought some gifts. The family came around. I had friends. There was some laughter, some tears, some congratulations. All well and good, but I was never called. 6 months went by, and I was never called. And here I was hanging on the sergeant's words that I was going to go in a matter of days. And I finally found out why. Because it was the Vietnam era and because of the draft, there were plenty of applicants for these communication officer slots in the reserves. And the other applicants, many of them, more than they needed, had math degrees, either in regular math or as engineers or architects or what have you, and they had good technical backgrounds. So I had 1 year of liberal arts math, which is just fundamental stuff, and so they had guys with better credentials than I had that was suited to the communications idea. I never got called. Well, I felt pretty bad about it until I met one of my neighbors who had just come back from Vietnam. He was my younger brother's best friend, and we grew up brothers, younger brothers, older brothers. We all grew up together. I grew up with his older brothers, two of them, and the whole family were dear friends of ours, and they were good guys. And these were solid, really good, the best kind of guys, foxhole kind of people that you'd want to be with if you were ever in trouble. Well, this guy came back, and he had been in Khe Sanh in Vietnam. And Khe Sanh was famous or infamous because Khe Sanh was a Marine stronghold that was being bombarded by artillery around the clock for months. And it was a very stressful and calamitous situation. Marines were surrounded there. They weren't giving up. They were airdropping supplies in, but they were under constant artillery fire. And people went under the pressure, succumbed to the pressure. And he told me stories. He said, "Look," he says, "it's a horror show. There are guys there that are breaking up psychologically." He says, and the story is that Marines have killed other Marines who were adding to the stress and they couldn't take it. He says, not to mention, he says, the whole place is a mess. He says, there are officers that have been shot by enlisted men because the officers were unreasonable or stupid or uncaring and irresponsible. He says, and it happens, and Marines don't tell you about this. He says, but it happens. It happens in wartime on occasion, hopefully not too much. He says, but it happens. He says, we go over there. They don't want to win this war. We don't want to win this. He said, we go over there and we fight and give up casualties and lives to gain a specific territory, give it up, and then we find ourselves 3 or 4 days later fighting for the same territory that we gave up. He says it's ridiculous. He says the whole thing is morale is a shambles. The whole war is a shambles. He said you should be glad. You should be glad that you didn't go. Years later, many years later, I lost a friend, a fellow judge, who had been a machine gunner on a helicopter in the Marine Air Wing. And he died from myeloma in his early 60s, leaving a wife and two young kids, teenage kids, college-age kids. And he was in Da Nang Air Base, which was attacked twice by the Viet Cong, during which they blew up the storage dump for Agent Orange, which was the toxic, they used to carry in 50, Agent Orange because it was orange drums, 50-gallon drums. And it was a toxic defoliant that they used in Vietnam. And he was exposed to that twice with explosions. And his present from the Marines, his reward was myeloma, which killed him prematurely. So I wanted to get into the police department, didn't make it. I wanted to get into the Marine Corps and didn't make it. I didn't get what I want, but I did get what I need. I did need to avoid the psychological scarring of the young man that had been in Khe Sanh. He was quite never the same after that. And I certainly avoided the premature death of my other buddy, and I avoided the possibility of fate of all of those people who are inscribed at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.